start to think about this a little more, because I know I'm not alone in probably these experiences. So we can talk a little bit about genetics. So I do often hear depression runs in my family. Depression's in my genes, right? I was born this way. And yes and no, it may be in your genetics, but it does not mean that you do not have control over it. So genes are inherited from your parents. So you get half of your genes from your mother, half of your genes from your father. And what they are is that they're inherited segments of DNA that code for certain processes or functions in your body. So they might code for energy production or neurotransmitter production. And what happens is when your DNA is forming, you can pick up these genetic mutations that come from your parents. And they're called genetic mutations, or aka genetic SNPs. SNP, that stands for long word, single nucleotide polymorphism, but we can just call them a SNP. And what that is it's a change in the sequence of genes that's kind of like a little glitch. And it's going to either speed up or more often slow down a process in the body and whatever that gene is coding for. So for example, this would maybe be a common gene, a more typical one. And then they have a genetic mutation here. So instead of the G, you have an A, and then here. So instead of a T, you have a G. And you might have one, which would make you heterozygous for a mutation, or you might have two, which makes you homozygous for a mutation. And a good example of this is the Mthfr gene, and I just bring that up because it's a very popular and many of you have maybe heard of. And mutations in this gene can have consequences throughout the entire body. And that gene specifically, you need to correct and support. You can't, fix your gene, but you can support it so that the process works more efficiently before you can really fully impact other systems and even like these neurotransmitter systems. So you need to look at the genes throughout your body because they do predispose you to disease. So a lot of times when people talk about genetics, it gets really gloom. And it's important to remember that genes are not dooming you. So if you're predisposed to depression, if you're predisposed to cancer, that does not mean you're going to get it, right? You can turn these genes on and you can turn them off. You can impact how your genes express themselves. And you can do this through your diet and lifestyle. So, through triggering events, there's something that's going to trigger it. And I like the expression that genetics load the gun, so they might predispose you to something, but your environment's going to pull that trigger. It's going to decide whether you get a disease or not. And those triggering events are inflammatory events. They can be things like food allergies or poor diet, chronic infections, physical stress, overexercise, not enough sleep, blood sugar imbalances. There's so many different little triggering events that are internal stressors or external stressors happening around you that cause inflammation, and that can turn on these genes. So when these genes get flipped on, when they are told to express, that's when you often get these diseases. And you can have power over this and whether this happens or not. So three common genes that I look at when we are working with clients on their mood specifically. So you do need to look at others, but just to give you a little viewpoint into this, there's three genes that are associated especially with mood. So the COMT, the MAO, and the GAD1. So the COMT gene has to do with the breakdown of adrenaline, having inefficiencies here, so the genetic mutations, the genetic SNPs, can make this system not as efficient. So you have maybe more adrenaline, higher pain, higher anxiety. Things like caffeine, coffee, drugs, other stimulants can be harder on you. And you might have a harder time reversing feelings. This has to do with the breakdown of catecholamines. So something might happen and you just can't get over it. right? So if you've ever been told, if you might get upset about something and there's still a couple hours, you're still upset. I know that can happen with me sometimes. And with anxious feelings, this can happen. If you just can't get over it, it's still pulsing in your body. People tell you to just smile or brush it off, and you can't. You may have something happening. You might have an inefficiency in your COMT gene that makes this a lot harder for you to do. The MAO, the MAOB especially, that has to do with the breakdown of dopamine. And this can put you at a higher risk of depression and mood disorders. This also works in a relationship with adrenaline. So remember that bell curve here. You want to be in that optimal range, but since adrenaline uses dopamine, you can actually end up with high amounts of adrenaline running in your body, causing, anxiety, panic, at the expense of your dopamine reserve. So your dopamines might lower because they're being used for adrenaline. So you can simultaneously end up with symptoms on, low dopamine, high adrenaline, and that's where these balances can really go askew. So you need a happy balance between all of your neurotransmitters. And then we have GAD1, and this has to do with GABA, so that cool, calm, happy neurotransmitter. Having inefficiencies in this gene can affect your outlook on life. Maybe you have just more of a pessimistic view, and that's just kind of your natural state. You might have sleep disorders, general unease. So all of these affect the turnover rate. So you might not break down these chemicals very fast, and they can overwhelm you. So having mutations here means you might not be able to handle stressful situations quite as well. You can't handle emotional stress, physical stress, maybe as well as others if you feel like someone that gets overwhelmed easier. So I have told you that I personally have experienced this, and these are my genetics. So these are my genes for those three different genetic codes. And you can see that I have mutations in all three of them. So the plus and the minus here would mean kind of like a partial mutation. So one of my parents gave me a mutation. This would mean I got a mutation from both of my parents. I have two, so this is the most inefficient I can have for this gene, and this is a partial here. So I am predisposed to have mood issues, and I often have felt that way. So when I didn't have things under control, I felt I felt crazy at times, not understanding why my body was acting this way, why my mind was working that way. And that can be extremely frustrating when you just don't, things might be going well in your life and you just don't understand why you're feeling a certain way. And this causes a stress on your body physically as well. It did for me. Not breaking down these neurotransmitters well means that you can have higher stress hormones. And this can affect your gut. This can affect your gut with pain, with inflammation, dysbiosis. IBS and depression, so irritable bowel syndrome and depression, actually seem to go hand in hand. Many people with depression have IBS, and many people with IBS have depression. So there are correlations, and a lot might have to do with the inflammation, the signals that are going back and forth. So I have had to find a way to support this. I've had to know my tendencies, realize what's happening chemically, and also so I can alter my thoughts, right? So that's helped me tremendously. Knowing that I'm set up to have anxious or depressed feelings, I've learned firsthand how difficult that can be, but I've also learned how to manage them. So you can support these genetic mutations and processes through your diet, lifestyle, and supplementation. So it's given me the power to have control over my feelings and my moods. I know that I biologically cannot handle mental or physical stress quite as well, so I have to alter my lifestyle to support this. I need to be able to take that time for myself, because when I start to slip down a path, I have a better ability to understand what's happening and I can combat it. I can prevent any serious overwhelm. And knowing my genes and knowing my predispositions has really helped give me power to do that. So there's um, more to this, but you need to support your body by knowing how it's working and what specifically you may need. So instead of just, trying different treatments here and there, not having a real targeted approach, it's so great to really understand your body